Good morning. Thank you for attending today's webinar brought to you by the South Carolina Office of Special Education Services and the Transition Alliance of South Carolina. My name is Mike Stutz, and I am your host for today's webinar. This event was developed in response and in conjunction with the South Carolina High School Credential Symposium to get your questions answered as we move forward with Year 2 implementation of the South Carolina High School Credential. Just a few housekeeping notes. All attendees will be muted throughout the webinar. Options for viewing are available by hovering your mouse over the bottom of the Zoom window. This webinar is being recorded. A link to the recorded video along with the PowerPoint will be posted to the South Carolina Credential website on the supplemental materials page within 24 hours. If you have questions for the presenters during the webinar, please use the Q&A feature located within the Zoom window. And with that, let's get started. Welcome to the South Carolina High School Credential Video Learning Series, Career Portfolios presentation. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to the panel of presenters for this webinar. From the Office of Special Education Services, Tabitha Strickland, and with the Transition Alliance of South Carolina, Dr. Cindy Nixon. Tabitha, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. Today's agenda for the webinar is going to be, first, we're going to talk about the what and the why of portfolios. We're going to talk a little bit about the teacher elements and the student elements that come along with developing a portfolio for the South Carolina High School Credential, and then we'll finish up with some logistics and different types of portfolios to keep in mind as you work through and support students to meet this requirement of the South Carolina High School Credential. So let's first start to talk about the what and the why. First, we want to talk about what the portfolio offers. It offers the opportunity to observe and document student behaviors and skills over a long period of time. It also gives teachers a powerful tool for assessing and promoting academic and work progress as well as personal growth. It enables the student, teacher, and family to focus on strengths and develop compensatory strategies for weaknesses. And it also is required to obtain the South Carolina High School Credential. We're going to talk about the what by investigating the phases of the portfolio. First, let's talk about the teacher process phase. It is imperative that teachers are not planning, instructing, and facilitating portfolio production in isolation. There must be collaboration and a shared understanding of the portfolio requirements. Second, the student process phase involves the student's ownership in not only the planning, the management, but also the completion of the portfolio. The student process phase involves short and long-term planning, management and completion of requirements. It fosters skill development, and it provides practice in time management, problem solving, decision-making, communication, accepting feedback, review, revision, and self-assessment. Finally, the final phase, the student product. This is the tangible collection of evidence, and it is an ongoing assessment that is maintained and produced annually. Before we talk about the teacher and student elements, let's finish our why and what by talking about the understanding of the portfolio. As a teacher, there must be clearly defined student outcomes. You must be familiar with all parts of the process and the product. Be sure to develop expectations and procedures for the year. Develop a model portfolio with all the required forms. Understand the role of the rubric, especially if you're choosing to grade the portfolio. And develop or identify rubrics for portfolio items so students have a conceptual understanding of what is expected for each entry. So now that we understand a little bit of the what and the why related to the portfolio and the South Carolina High School Credential, Cindy's going to dive in a little bit deeper into our teacher element.
So let's start with the teacher elements and the role of the teacher. First and foremost, it is important to provide instruction to the student. You need to ensure that the students understand the task being presented by providing instruction and guidance. Your students have probably never completed a portfolio, and this is a key point that needs to be done early in order that students can understand what the end product will be. Help the students work through their problems to come up with solutions. In the beginning, it will be difficult, and you not only will have to be the facilitator, but you will have to provide some time to take students through the steps and help them with the problems that they encounter. The portfolio will assist students with time management, and it will foster organizational skills. A time should be set aside each week to work on the portfolio. It could be 1 time a week, it could be 3 times a week. It really depends on your schedule and the student's needs. But doing it on a weekly basis will help the students become more familiar with the process, and they will begin to enjoy the portfolio and look forward to working on it. Organizational skills are critical, as it is important to remember that the portfolio belongs to the student and they need to be responsible for organizing. So you will need to provide instruction on time management and on organization. It is also key to provide feedback on a weekly basis. The students need to know what is working and what is not working. What do they need to look for? What do they need to consider to put in the portfolio? And they're going to need your feedback. It is recommended that teachers have a brief 5 to 10-minute conference with the students weekly or bi-weekly on their portfolio. Help them facilitate the development of the portfolio and provide them with a model. It is always recommended that you create a portfolio, or you may even have one that you have created when you were a student getting your degree in education. The portfolio model should come with rubrics so that the student knows what they need to accomplish. And your portfolio, they can be a notebook or they can be virtual, such as a LiveBinder or Google. That is entirely up to you.
An important teacher element related to the portfolio is planning. In order to plan, you must start with the end in mind. If you haven't already, make sure you know what the portfolio essentials are for each grade level and plan backwards. Be sure to take a team approach to planning. Review all the required components, develop a timeline and syllabus, look at requirements for each grade to understand what students need to accomplish within that given year. And then finally, you want to make sure that you are utilizing the available employability education pacing guides to assist with planning. This presentation will be made available, so feel free to click on the link available to review all the essentials for each grade.
Responding to student work is critical in the process of making the portfolio a working document. A couple key things to remember as the teacher. Always focus on the positive. As educators, I think that we have a tendency to want to jump in and maybe help more than we need to. And you may remember back when you were in school, if you did something really well, you thought you did, and you got a comment from the teacher, or maybe that red pen got too busy on your paper. So focus on the positive with the students. For example, an idea that captured my interest is, and help them take your cues and move forward. Always use phrases that place students in a teaching role. Help me understand why you chose that particular document to put in your portfolio. Show me where you have added information regarding your job shadowing. Preface suggestions with phrases such as, try to, or I think that. Be specific. Your answer to the equation needs to be reduced to the lowest terms rather than simply saying, you're not finished yet. Always end with a positive comment. The more positive you are, the more motivated the students are going to be when it comes to working on their portfolio. Facilitating time for the work sample selection. This is always difficult as kids may want to put everything in their portfolio. So some key things that a teacher can do: set aside class time. As Tabitha mentioned earlier, it's always good to have a syllabus. And in that syllabus, you can designate the times so the students are aware that on Friday at 1 o'clock in the resource setting, self-contained setting, whatever setting, this is the hour that we're going to work on the class portfolio, on your portfolio. So set aside a time. I have always told teachers, I think Friday's a great day to do it. But once again, you decide. And I would allow an hour, depending on what your schedule is. Schedule round robins. This has been done very successfully, asking students to maybe take 10 minutes and orally share part of their portfolio. As they're completing work, part of this class time could be each student pulling out one piece that they've entered that week and explain why. Meet with the students individually. This is critical, as I mentioned earlier. Feedback is everything with a portfolio. So you always want to meet with the students and kind of see where they are. Do some students, are they moving independently and they're doing great? Or are some other students having difficulty? Always remember that it is more difficult for students having difficulty to raise their hand and ask for help. So if you set up little conferences during the course of your class time to meet with them, that would be best. The other nice thing that I have seen in the past when I was in North Carolina many years ago was that teachers hosted a portfolio day. And it usually was at the end of the semester or the end of the year. And they had a group of students get together and they shared their learning samples, they shared their portfolios. I have also seen teachers host a portfolio evening where they invited the parents to come in and view the students' portfolios, which I thought was really a neat idea. The particular teacher that did this got money from the PTO and had pizza and sodas, and it was a really fun event. Now we're going to move on to the student elements. Students, as you move forward with the portfolio, you're going to find that there are many skills that the students are going to develop. One is evidence collection. Teaching them how to collect, keep track, and categorize a very large amount of evidence. Obviously, every sheet of paper they have cannot go into the portfolio, but they may need to collect it over the course of a week or two And then when you have that period during your week where they're going to work on portfolio, they're going to have to sort through and categorize what they want to keep and what they don't need to keep. Once again, this is going to help with time management skills because they're only going to have a limited time to do this. They're going to need to problem solve and goal set. They've got to analyze their own work, look at it, identify what their strengths and weaknesses are, set personal goals. For example, if you look at the pacing guide for the employability skills, the portfolio is part of that, but also during that employability class, they're going to be taking surveys, interest inventories, assistive technology, checklists, those types of things. So goal setting could actually be, when do I need to take that career interest inventory, and have them set a date for it to be completed. So you're going to do goal setting, have them set those personal goals as to when they hope to complete all of the evidence that they need. You can introduce action plans and then teach them how to implement those plans. Importantly, they're going to need to evaluate and decide what evidence is most important. They need to be independent of the processes. In the beginning, they will depend on you, but always remember the portfolio belongs to the student. And while we always like to say, oh, I like that one best, they need to do it independently. And then the final part of the skills is the reflection. And so they choose something, and then they need to reflect on why they made that choice and be able to communicate to you and to others on the strengths and weaknesses of working on this portfolio.
Time management is an essential skill developed by each student working on the South Carolina High School Credential Portfolio. In order to assist in this skill development, students must first develop timelines to finish the portfolios. They need to meet established deadlines, make effective use of class time, and complete the portfolio evidence as needed, both inside and outside of class time. In order to further develop independence, students must assume responsibility for portfolio completion, establish priorities leading to evidence completion, maintain that motivation throughout the process. So if you as a teacher sees that motivation starting to lag behind, then you may want to implement some positive behavioral supports to incentivize continuing completion towards this portfolio. Students must initiate and maintain attention and focus throughout the work time that you've established in your classroom, demonstrate care and responsibility with supporting evidence, and work in a way that supports and does not distract others.
Student reflections are actually the heart of the portfolio. And if you read any research about student portfolios, you will find that the reflection plays a very big component of the portfolio, but oftentimes is neglected or left out due to the lack of time. It is important to take the time to give careful consideration to work and self. This is where the student is going to look at their evidence and honestly assess what they have learned and how they have grown. Sometimes you may need to highlight a skill that needs to be developed and practiced. You'll discover those as you meet individually with the students for their conferences. Use communication skills to express thoughts and observations. Students will learn to think on their own. Reflections help students express thoughts and determine strengths and weaknesses for the work that they've chosen to go in the portfolio. It also helps them become emotionally or develop their emotional intelligence by being very honest with themselves. Many of you probably have done something where you sat back and said, I think I could have done better, or I need to work on this more. That's what we want students to be able to learn, to take an overall look at what they've done and then make the determination that this is really good. I don't think I could do any better, or I may need to do a little bit more work. This probably isn't my best work, but I've given it a try and I'm proud of where I've gotten to. One of the things with reflections is you are going to have to, once again, take time during your class period for the student to write the reflection. Successful reflections are simply a short explanation of a learning sample. One idea that I have seen teachers use is to give each child a note card, a small note card, and have them write the reflection on the note card. Many times students will be given a sheet of paper and it's a little bit overwhelming to them because of potentially written language issues. And so by giving them a small note card, oftentimes this is very doable. And that way we're not asking them to write a dissertation. So think short. And once again, if it helps, consider using note cards. The student needs to give an explanation of why the entry was chosen. If you have a student that has difficulty getting their thoughts on paper, it is certainly acceptable for you to help them write it, but don't put words in their mouth. Let them tell you why. This will help with the learning processes. It'll help the students acknowledge specific strengths and weaknesses. And you can also begin to identify those goals for future growth. Always remember with the reflections, this is a student reflection, and simply give them prompts to think about what they need to write, not to put words in their mouth. One of the things with the portfolio that I like to see students do, and I think it's very effective, is to create an introductory letter. So it can be done at the beginning of the year and then revised at the end of the year. Depending on your students, you can make it an open letter or a fill-in-the-blank format. For an example, you give them prompts. My portfolio is organized by, my portfolio shows, my best piece of work is my essay, my favorite piece of work is an art project, the piece that shows my best effort, I think I have grown, and next year I plan to work on. Very simple statements, and you can certainly add more to it. The introductory letter is an introduction and goes at the beginning of the portfolio to introduce the portfolio. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the logistics and the types. Keep in mind that these are student-produced products, such as a class-required report, perhaps a research paper. Work samples need to include the reflection. If you have students that are in school-based enterprises or actually doing community-based work, keep in mind that a student-produced product can also be a short PowerPoint. It could be pictures, those types of things. Have the students choose their own work samples. Keep in mind, you may think, oh, this isn't a good one. But once again, it belongs to the student. And even though their first sample may not be the perfect sample, keep in mind that by the time they get to the end of the school year, they could have a different sample, and then you have a growth entry. Which brings me to best work entry or growth entry. Think about what you want the portfolio to look like. There is no right or wrong. So you could have students enter their best work, and so they could collect a variety of work from an English class or an art class, and then at the end of the month, you have them choose their best work from their samples. A growth entry is more like a beginning of the year math class or math test sample, and then over the course of the semester or the year, depending on how your classes go, the students will add to that and hopefully by the end show improvement. So you would have a before and an end, which would be a growth entry. Keep in mind that whether it's best work or growth, they both need that reflection. Some examples, some examples of best work before we move on. Language arts students could provide an original poem, a Venn diagram, an essay. In social studies, they may do a biography of a historical character. They may write a letter in a government class. In math, they may have a computer-aided generated graph, perhaps best performance on a quiz. Other things, photographs of a poster, autobiographies, as I mentioned, photographs of them actually working, social studies, articles on current events, if they do a cartoon analysis. There are so many different things that you can include. There are two major types of portfolios. The most common and probably what I've seen as the most used is the notebook binder. It's usually the 3-ring notebook. It's got tabs that you divide by the year or by the course, a table of contents. It's got the entries followed by the written reflection. With a notebook, organization matters. You don't want things just all over the place. So organization, as we've talked about earlier, is very critical with a notebook. And keep in mind, it is student owned. So the student makes the choices. The electronic is usually stored on a computer or the cloud. It obviously is very easy to make updates on over the semester, over the year. It's very easy to share or transfer. Once again, organization matters. It also is student owned, and probably the two best examples that I have seen in South Carolina are those who use Google Doc and LiveBinder. I believe there are some sites that you can pay for, and there are probably others, but these are the two most common. Just a couple logistical tips if you're going to use the notebook. Always have a cover sheet, and I've always recommended that you buy the notebook that has the opening, the clear opening, so that the students can decorate their cover sheet. And I also recommend that you make labels for the spine. So that way, if you're storing them on a shelf, students can easily come up and get their notebook. Tabs for entries, you're going to have to decide what works for you. You could do tabs for courses. You could do tabs for years. You could do tabs simply for the employability class. It really is going to be up to you. I recommend using sheet protectors and teaching students how to make things look neat. There's nothing worse than a student comes in and pulls out something for their portfolio that has been in the bottom of their book bag for the last 2 weeks. Separate it into 4 sections if you need to. Once again, this is going to be dependent on how you want to handle this, but they will need one for 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. So however you want to figure that out, that works for you and your students. You're always going to have a table of contents, and sometimes that will be finalized at the end of the school year. It is important to consider storage. I have been in classrooms where there is very little room to store for a group of 15, 20 students. So you've got to think about storage. It is important to remember with storage that there is personal information in the notebooks. One of the things that you are probably going to keep in there are IEPs, assessments, such as a schema, those types of things. Depending on what the student adds, once again, it is probably going to need to be kept in some type of secure storage. And so you need to think about that for over the summer. Student entries are going to be made throughout the year, and it also is very critical that students date entries. So each week when you're working on the portfolio and students are making entries, make sure that somewhere, even if it's on the back of the page, that somewhere it is dated. Once again, it's very hard at the end of the school year to go back and figure out when that entry was. In terms of storage, I'll just share a couple things I've seen. And once again, this was up in North Carolina many years ago. But we had a couple teachers. I was running a collaborative grant through ECU with a local school district, and we were doing portfolios, and the student had limited space. So she got very creative. And because students were bringing in a lot of work, she had started with file folders, which worked okay, but got messy. And so she ended up getting cereal boxes. And she had a bunch of cereal boxes about the large size of Cheerios. The students decorated the front of the boxes, and that's where they put their work, their schoolwork in until the end of the week. And then they would go through their cereal box and throw away work that they didn't need and work that they wanted to keep. Another teacher in the district, the same district, used pizza boxes because Domino's was a huge sponsor of the special education classes in this district. And the teacher, we had 2 students that were actually working at Domino's. And so the teacher, or Domino's, gave the teacher several boxes. And as you can think, those square boxes stacked very neatly. And so the students would, obviously they were new pizza boxes, not used. And the students would decorated the top of their boxes, usually with a pizza theme. And I wish I'd taken pictures, but, and they would put their papers in there. And then once a month, I believe, or once every 2 or 3 weeks, they would go through the pizza box and once again, transfer what they wanted to keep to the portfolio and discard the rest. So just some fun things to make it fun. The other nice thing was Domino's, with that particular teacher, donated pizzas once a month to the kids when they were working on their portfolios. I thought that was kind of cool too. Last, consider year-to-year transfer. As the kids move up, how are you going to transfer those portfolios? I don't know that you want to send them home. That's up to you, but you do need to consider the year-to-year transfer. What's going to be easiest? How are you going to handle it? You're in a district that may have 3 or 4 high schools. As you know, we all know kids transfer from high school to high school. So stop and think about all of that when you're doing this and make it easy on yourself. But it is certainly something that needs to probably have a written out process on how that's going to be handled.
That's a good point, Cindy. As a matter of fact, every school district should have policies and procedures related to how those portfolios are going to transfer from year to year. So if you haven't already consulted your district's policies and procedures, you may want to reach out to see how the district's laid it out if they haven't already provided that guidance to you. And before Mike closes us out, there's a few takeaways that I want you just to highlight, considering what's been discussed during today's webinar. One is, as a teacher, make sure you have a model. Make sure that that model is available and that you've shared it and you've shown it to your students, whether it is electronic or whether it's a notebook. The other is it is student-owned. The notebook or the portfolio is not teacher-owned, it is student-owned, and the best you can do is to make sure in how you instruct and plan for the student to work on this portfolio, that there is always an underlying theme, that you are the facilitator and that the student is owning that product. Focus on the positive and that the reflections are the heart of your portfolio. Without reflections, your portfolio is not breathing, it is not living, it is not moving forward, and is not going to be anything that a student can use to really help them be successful or gain post-secondary competitive employment when they leave us. So those are the big key takeaways for this webinar. I'm going to pass it on to Mike so he can close us out.
All right, this concludes today's presentation portion of the webinar, but please know that no question goes unanswered. We invite you to refer to the IEP team guidance document, the crosswalking document, and the frequently asked questions document. Additionally, you may ask a unique question using the South Carolina High School Credential Inquiry Form. And finally, if you are a special education director, you can request technical assistance. These options are all available by accessing the website, www.thesccredential.org.